Hello and welcome to another episode of Skin Like a Rhino by Elvie, the podcast in which I, Tania Boler, interview incredible women who are breaking old taboos and new ground. Today, I am delighted to be welcoming on the podcast Latham Thomas. Latham originally trained as a doula in the US before she went on to launch Mama Glow, a New York-based doula and maternity lifestyle brand. She is a passionate and highly influential campaigner for addressing health inequalities for Black women in the US, as well as visiting professor of gender and sexuality studies at Brown University. Latham, it's so great to have you on the show today. Thank you for joining. I am such a fan of what you've been doing. And I know that with Elvie and your platform, Mama Glow, we have a really exciting partnership going on in the US. But today, what I really was keen to do was delve into what you've built with Mama Glow, all the work you're doing to support women, and really critically, what is happening, your views in terms of the maternal mortality crisis in the US, specifically for Black women. Diving into, say, birthing experiences, right? I mean, like, obviously, because of what we do at Elvie, even with pelvic floor health, we support women at different life stages, but a lot of women I talk to are becoming parents for the first time. And It strikes me when I talk to my friends, that and our Elvie customers, that so many women seem to experience a real mismatch between their expectations for birthing and what happens, and obviously in a very negative direction. Is this something that you see frequently, and why is it happening?
Yeah, I would say that, what we're seeing in the sort of maternal health landscape today in the United States, most specifically, is there's a rise in people feeling, that they want access to information, that they want accountability for things that are happening inside of our medical system. But on a national level, we see that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth or due to childbirth-related causes, and shortly after childbirth. And this is in comparison to their white counterparts. And when we look at this data, people are like, well, is it their health? Is it lifestyle? What is it, right? What we understand is that and what the data shows is that a Black woman with a postgraduate degree who gets pregnant in her 30s, education, has access to healthcare, has access to insurance, is upwardly mobile. That person who's well-resourced, who gets pregnant, has worse outcomes than a white woman who graduates high school, who only has high school level education. And so what that helps us to understand is that your finances do not protect you if you're a Black, your education does not protect you, that class does not protect you, that insurance does not protect you, right? And that what factors are at play when we think about the social determinants of health, which are the non-medical factors that impact our health outcomes, we are looking at intersections, and intersections in identity also impact our health outcomes, because a big factor that's at play is race. And so the conversation we're having now, the discourse around what is happening, is largely about racism in the medical system, how bias and racism affect care outcomes on Black and brown birthing individuals, and what that means when we think about, a larger movement towards eradicating maternal death in this country. What has to be done, right? And how do we account for a system that's embedded with racism, that needs to change, that needs to be, I don't like the word reformed, I think reimagined and redesigned, right? That's a lot of work that has to be done. We're certainly, in our organization, thinking about it from an educational point of view and reaching young people early. And so that's something that's part of how we design our educational pathways for professional development on Mama Glow and the Mama Glow Foundation. But it is something that we have to have a larger conversation about, and think about where are the resources going, and also like how do we deploy these resources to ensure that everybody gets the best care possible. How do we ensure that everyone can get culturally competent care, that everyone can get a doula, that everyone can have access to, accessible and affordable health care along the entire reproductive journey, and that care is culturally congruent, and that care is safe, right? Are there care providers or hospital systems, or, how do we approach this from a policy level or legislatively, right? We have to be educated enough, I think, as a people to move into a space where we're not just looking at it from a point of view of, oh, this is a women's issue or a Black woman's issue. But if we can embrace it, it's a human rights issue, right? Then from that point of view, I think people can come to the table with resources, with understanding, and then take action, because we really need a lot more people to not just galvanize and make noise, but also to help us make change.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, so much to unpack there. I mean, when you talk about those things we need to divest out of, the things that are holding us back, just for the audience who maybe not familiar with the nature of the problem. I mean, as I started researching in preparation for this podcast, I was shocked to read that I think Black women are nearly 2 times less likely to have any prenatal care, right? Or very minimal prenatal care. I think that's sort of one manifestation, is that they're getting less care. And I think when you and I have talked previously, it's about the quality of care. I mean, can you sort of describe sort of what, I know there's no typical journey, but what are some of the problems that we're seeing on the healthcare provision side when it comes to prenatal, childbirth and postnatal for Black women?
Yeah. So it's important to note that the majority of the Black population in the United States still lives in the South, right? And so even though Black people make up about 13% of the population in the US, the majority are still in the South. And so even though we see advances in healthcare all the time, and we see that, and we have conversations about like how accessible, our healthcare system is. When you get pregnant, it's really hard to navigate healthcare. And in the South, in like a place, like Alabama, for instance, that might have like they might have like 60 counties. Of that, they may have half that have actual care providers, OBGYNs, right? So then you have to think about maternal deserts. And what we call maternal deserts are essentially like how people have heard of food deserts, where there's poor access to healthy and quality food in a particular community, which forces that community to resource and only have access to processed food. So similar concept in that maternity care deserts are footprints where there is no full scope maternal healthcare resource and service provision in an area, and people have to travel 2 hours or more to get access to care. And also there's fear, right? You have things like social media, things like news reporting that is at this point regularly reporting on Black maternal deaths in this country, which can make somebody feel incapacitated, right? I don't know that I want to have a baby, let alone do I want to pursue my care? I'm nervous. Like most people are seeking out care providers. And the issue is that many times they're made to feel unsafe in the relationship, in the care relationship, and they're swallowing their pride or swallowing their dignity to, work with a provider that doesn't feel like 100% of a match, but they're going to do it anyway because we're here. You see that happening a lot too, where people are just like, well, I don't really love this position, but, I don't feel like I have a choice. And I want to underscore that there's always choice. I think it's very challenging to have people come into a healthcare, like be involved in a dynamic like this, where you're where you are feeling tenuous, nervous, and on high alert about how your care might be conducted. That type of environment, right, induces stress, can also induce things like high blood pressure, right? We have to factor in that if I believe this place to be, or this person, or this, system, or this physician, or this clinic, right, to be a place where I could be harmed, or that something will happen to me because it happened to my cousin, it happened to my friend, that's going to impact my choices, right? If I'm seeing on the news and on social media, like this person died and this happened to this person, that could impact the types of choices that I make.
Just to summarize, you're saying in some ways there's one factor is that there's a predominance of the Black populations in the South, where the quality of healthcare is much lower, as you call it, maternity desert. But then within the institution, even as you were saying, an educated professional Black woman is likely to be dealing with racism within an institution. And then it sounds like what you're saying is that compounds itself then in terms of then fear, which then creates certain behaviors, which then sort of create this negative cycle. Is that partly what explains, because when I was looking into what are the main reasons why Black women are dying during pregnancy and childbirth, and I've touched upon this before, is around preeclampsia, right? And you talked about high blood pressure. I think I read, is it that Black women are 60% more likely to get preeclampsia? For the audience, would you mind just explaining what preeclampsia is and how this fits into what you're explaining? And I think also something which you explained to me earlier, which was around weathering, right? So why a woman in her 40s is more likely to have complications than a woman in her early 20s.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yeah. So, and I want to underscore, that my work obviously is in clinical spaces. I am a doula. I am a professor. I do work within medicine and within the healthcare system. So preeclampsia is pregnancy-induced hypertension, and it generally onsets in late second to third trimester. So it's not something that we typically see early on, but it does develop. Usually the onset is quite drastic, right? So people will start to see things like swelling in hands or feet, ankles and wrists. Sometimes in the face will become fuller. Sometimes the face will become fuller. We also typically see with preeclampsia things like, foggy thinking or memory, lot like confusion, things like that, headaches, which can also be a result of cerebral, like a brain swelling rather, right? We also see things like protein might be leached into the urine. So if there was urine sampling, you could find that present. And it is treatable during pregnancy. We can manage it. The cure typically is to have the baby to bring the blood pressure back into normal range. Also, it is, if it's not treated and not detected, there are things that go on during a pregnancy that would be considered typically normal, quote unquote. But if we add these symptoms together to create a picture, we could see that something that is manageable that can become lethal. Hypertension is about constriction, is about pressure, is about feeling the constant and pervasive chronic stress that impacts the body over time, creates constriction, creates hypertension. And so when we talk about it like, oh, it's just dietary, no, it is living within a system where we cannot escape the chronic stress. We cannot escape the racism, the poverty, the domestic violence, the whatever it is, right? When there are the structural racism, right? When we have factors that are working on us before we're born, and then we live a long time, you start to see that, oh, the grandmother has hypertension and the grandfather and then the daughter. And it's like, it seems hereditary, but really what is happening is those same people are impacted by systems over time. And they live a lifestyle, right, that is not conducive with supporting ease, right? And then they're swimming upstream. And so all of this leads to developing hypertension, right? So the weathering you mentioned is also part of that. If I am in my 20s or late teens and, I get pregnant, and I'm a Black woman, I have had less time, I have a shorter time horizon on the planet. Does not mean that my life was easier or less stressful or less traumatic, right? I could have endured a lot of things. There's going to be more weathering. So someone in their 40s, right, who has been impacted by structural racism, who've been impacted by the existential stressors that are outside of our control and that are connected to the social determinants of health, right? They will have been exposed to more weathering over time. And so that also creates vulnerabilities health-wise, right? So we really need to think about how all of this interplay, right, really tells a story, right, about what is happening within healthcare, but also what's happening outside, right? What are the things that are happening on a societal level that create these spaces for gaps that people slip through, but also how come we don't have these care gaps filled where we can find that someone is uniquely vulnerable? Okay, how do we make sure that they're hooked up with support, that they have a doula, that they have a physician, that they have, if they need a specialist for whatever it is, we need to be better at detection, at diagnostic testing and diagnosis, because what's happening for many people is they're underdiagnosed, they're misdiagnosed, they're dismissed. If we back up a teeny bit, and I don't want to go super heavy on history, but the current medical model is built upon and predicated upon in the United States, from a gynecological point of view, the work of men who were enslavers, who used the bodies of Black women for experimentation that was not consensual, experimentation that was also done with instrumentation that was being developed and tested on their bodies without anesthesia, even though anesthesia was widely available in the 1800s. This is the background, right? That we have, a doctor that we revere who has statues in this country named James Marion Sims, who was known as the father of modern gynecology. If you go and get a gynecological checkup, and they have you put your feet in stirrups and they place a speculum inside of you, it is he who perfected the speculum that is in use today on your body. If you have a vagina, to look inside, to check your cervix, look at your uterus, all of this, right? This tool was perfected on Black women's bodies without consent. There was a belief that Black women and Black-bodied individuals were impervious to pain, right? That they can handle pain, they don't feel it. They basically are not human. They're superhuman or subhuman, but they're not human. And so this belief that was embedded in medicine wasn't scientific, but it was embedded in medicine. So today you have people in medical school and people who are inside of hospitals who still believe oh no, there's a difference between how white women feel pain and how Black women feel pain. Black women do not feel pain. So if they say I'm uncomfortable, I have a headache, I'm having this pain, it's not believed. Or we believe you want drugs because we believe that you must be on drugs if you're coming to get drugs. So no, we're not going to give them to you. So there's this, right? So then people, I have a headache. No, you can just go take a Tylenol, go home. Actually, this headache, right, is connected to the fact that I have hypertension and I'm moving into preeclampsia and actually moving into a dangerous territory, right? So the racism and these beliefs that are structurally embedded make it so that people do not get access to care, even though they're in a space where care providing is happening, right? Or it makes it so that that care is delivered in a way that is disrespectful or that is abusive. And so we have an opportunity to, with the information that we have and that we're capturing, to do things differently. We have an opportunity to invest in different care models and to also go back to models of care that were working for us. You know, I know that in the UK, you have a higher midwifery to obstetrician ratio and you have better birth outcomes as a result of that. In the US, we have a higher obstetrician to midwifery ratio. We have about 37,000 OBGYNs in the US, and less than 2% of them are Black, by the way. In the United States, we also have like about 14,000 midwives. So less than half, 14,000. Of that group, there's about 6% who identify as people of color. Less than 2% identify as Black. In a nation, by the way, where in the beginning, it was all Black and Indigenous midwives delivering babies.
So Latham, yes, yeah. I mean, right. It's good to switch to what can be done, but just to what you've just mentioned, obviously talking through the history is all very upsetting. And I can see from what you explained, it's systemic, right? And it's been compounding over decades, leading to behaviors and so on, this medical racism. And I think when you mentioned the words, treating Black people as subhuman, that's very much a rights issue as well, right? And that's how you look at this. Is that correct? So it was a systemic rights issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Definitely human rights, definitely an issue that all of us should be concerned, because if we get birth right, and I think the main thing to think about also, how I like to think about it is, so in the United States, there was a period where we were thinking about how to address disability. And, if someone was in a wheelchair, they were confined if they got to a corner and they wanted to get off the corner in their wheelchair. There was no curb cut in the sidewalk. So you would have to figure out how to get off the sidewalk. And this was like anywhere you were, where you were located. And so there was a huge uproar about, well, what should we do? Like, should we curb cuts and sidewalks? Oh my God, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And then we did. And if you think about who benefits from a curb cut, if I'm in a wheelchair and I get to the corner, I can easily smooth off into the street and cross the street. But guess who else can? A baby that's learning how to ride a bike, an elderly woman pushing her groceries across the street, a family pushing their baby stroller, right? A kid, crossing the street, to go to school. Right. So everybody benefits. Right. And we designed it, though, for the person who needed it most. You see, so when we think about this paradigm, it's like, if we get it right for Black women, everybody's going to benefit. So the focus, why we're really so committed to beating the drum about the focus being on Black women specifically, is because the data is there to show that we're dying the most and that literally we could be preventing these deaths, right? Like 60% of these deaths are preventable, which is very insane, right? Yeah. So if we know we can do it better and that everyone will improve, because by the way, white women are dying too. So I don't want to make it seem like just Black women are dying. White women are dying way less, but still. And so nobody should be dying. What I think is critically important in the discussion is like imagining something different, but also looking at what worked before. Midwifery models of care is the midwifery model of care is important. It is, I think, what can help us get to a place where we improve maternal health outcomes. But even in the United States, currently, we have impediments to midwifery support. We have impediments to education. And so we have built systems against midwifery, right? And as a result, here we are in a post-COVID world, quote unquote, where people are trying to navigate and think of like, well, how do I do, like, what are we doing? What does care look like? How do we design it? And we haven't thought about like, well, we actually made it impossible for people to get out of hospital care that were great candidates for it. So
and why is this though? I mean, why, to your point, why are there so fewer midwives in the US and UK? And why have you gone from a situation where, as you said, that predominantly Black women and now 2% of midwives are Black, right? And also maybe just to understand the role of doulas in that. And for anybody who doesn't know what a doula is, it would be great to hear about the importance of a doula.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's quite simple is that it's always about following the money, right? Like it's inexpensive to deliver, with a midwife. It's inexpensive if you have a low risk birth. It doesn't cost a lot. It doesn't take a lot of resources. And you can get you can, if you're at home, like there's no cost of staying in a hospital. There's no overhead of staff, right? So if we think about, institutions really focusing on what is important to them, which is the bottom line, they're not thinking about like how that impacts you, choices along the way, decisions that are made. They're thinking about like what's best for the institution, and the institutional goals are not always aligned with the goals of the family or the client, right? Or patient, right? And what I think is so interesting is that like our bodies are treated like they're wild and that they need to be tamed. And so when you go into a hospital, it is about confinement, right? Confining you. It is about surveilling you. It is about keeping you in place to be, right? Because you are wild and essentially like, we can't trust your body, right? That's the message that people get. Not you're empowered, you're capable, you have the capacity for birth, right? And we believe in you. That's not what's being messaged.
Yeah. And that's very dehumanizing as well, right? Which also feeds into that distance that's being created specifically with Black women who are not trusting the system to begin with. And doulas, talk me through, even you, I mean, you trained as a doula. What motivated you to do that? And what role are they playing in changing things?
Yeah. So doulas are non-clinical care providers that offer emotional support, physical and educational support, advocacy, as well as partner support if you have a partner present. And they're really like a cheerleader for your birth. They really help you with the non-clinical related functions of navigating the care continuum. They typically start with you, midway through a pregnancy to help you navigate the experience and provide you with resources and tools, information. And they do visits usually at home with you, and then we'll also attend the birth and do postpartum visits as well. And they're here to help ensure that there is a safe passage and transition into parenthood. The work is non-clinical in nature, meaning that they are not there to replace a doctor or replace a midwife, right? Everyone has a role, or a nurse, right? Doulas have their own role and they fill that role, which is like almost like creating this amazing glue to keep everyone together. And so I say all this to say that it's a deeply important role because we do have clinical data that shows that having a doula present can reduce the incidence of C-section, can increase vaginal deliveries, can increase maternal satisfaction, increase breastfeeding initiation and breastfeeding success, can also reduce the impact of postpartum depression and anxiety. And so there's so many things, right? So many benefits that we can actually quantify through data.
It sounds like sort of a doula is making up for the failings in the health system, right?
Well, I would say that because doulas and midwives are really like the oldest known profession, that what has happened, we've strayed so far away from what it was that what it does look like is making up for what should be there, when really the work was always about bringing into the fold a safety net of support and village keeping that was always part of how we navigated, right? Like our communities. And so it may now feel foreign, or may not feel, like you said, a result for basically looking at like how our care gaps are failing us, right? That the doulas are stepping in and filling those care gaps. It looks like that for sure, because we have built systems against caregiving. Now there's the opportunity for people who are doing this work in community to now do it in a way that's, more professionalized, because we do see the value and understand that that the role needs to be there because of how we currently live, right? The modern lifestyle does necessitate the need for an individual like a doula to be present. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think that it's sort of like we don't want to say that doulas are here to save the day, but there's a lot of things that doulas do contribute to help support positive birth outcomes. It can't all be on doulas to solve. It can't be on doulas to solve the maternal health crisis, but doulas are a wonderful and important intervention in the process, and an important factor as we think about how to remodel and design care. And we can train them much more easily and quickly. They don't have to go to nursing school. They don't have to, go to med school. So there are ways in which we can deploy them into the communities much more quickly and actually like get ahead of the problem if that's our commitment.
I mean, I'm nodding my head here because actually when you mentioned that doulas have always been around, as in women have always helped each other during birthing experiences, I found a very similar thing when we were doing the research for Elvie trainer and pelvic floor health, that actually things have got worse in the last 50 years, to your point around modern lifestyle, as people are living in more nuclear families and cities. They're not with the older generation of women. And when I talk to groups in Southeast Asia, or even in Australia, Aborigines have a certain type of stone that they use for pelvic floor training.
Yes.
There's a lot of women's wisdom that gets passed from generation to generation. Wisdom, so as you said, education and support, and it's just been lost. And the medical system now has become so perfunctory, right? And so sort of transactional that human side is very much missing. And as you said, there's nothing more human than giving birth.
Right.
Yeah. And Mama Glow, I mean, from my understanding, that is about supporting doulas, right? Both in terms of providing services to support the community, and then also advocacy change. And just talk me through a little bit about why you set up Mama Glow and what's going on now.
Yeah. So Mama Glow is a global maternal health and education platform. Our focus is primarily training the next generation of birth workers, of doulas. I am deeply committed to education. My focus, and I think my calling, in birth work actually has evolved from service to teaching. And so, and I feel really just privileged to be able to teach. And so we have publicly available courses that people can take at any point. And then we also design trainings for healthcare systems, for insurance providers and companies. And then we also, I teach in the university. And so our course is the first and only of its kind. It's been embedded in the Ivy League at Brown University, where I'm a visiting professor of the practice of gender and sexuality studies. And through the work that I do at Brown, I'm able to reach bioethics students, medical anthropologists, OB-GYN, pre-med, public health, and be able to teach this next generation of people who are going to impact our system and help design something different, right? So I feel very privileged to be able to do that as well. But I would say that, with Mama Glow, the other key thing that we have that I love is that there's a community. A lot of companies that are focused on service provision for families don't really have necessarily a community of care workers. We actually have a global network of care workers who we've trained, right? So we have over 2,500 doulas, and through our trainings and through our support systems that we keep in place to keep them connected, we have a really amazing galvanized community. And so people can book a doula through Mama Glow. They can, but doulas also have services that are provided to them to ensure that they can stay in the workforce. One of the things that's really important conversation happening right now, I don't know if this is happening in the UK in the same way, but I feel like there's always, interesting things happening on both sides of the pond. But I would say that birth worker burnout is huge here. Nurses are leaving the industry, just dropping like flies, like in terms of like leaving. And what we see also with doulas is are having burnout. Like, people are like, look, maybe 5 years of just like this hustle, it's too much.
And yeah, absolutely. Just to your point about the UK, we're having a huge NHS, National Health System crisis here at the moment. Burnout, and actually our health professionals who work so tirelessly are actually striking because they're saying, enough is enough. So Latham, it sounds like very much what you do is working from inside, as you said, the services, your support, teaching from within, trying to change practice. But I think you also hinted earlier that there have been some policy changes. Will you just talk us through, to those who are not familiar, but from what I understand, is it the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act? Is that to try and stop discrimination? And then possibly more relevant, what's happening with the Mumnibus Acts?
I mean, now, right, we're in a place where we can actually really say that even though there have been protections widely, that people were widely aware of, I should say, that were to ensure there was no discrimination against pregnant people. We know that in practice, right, people find ways to screen for and ensure that they do not hire pregnant individuals, to penalize or to punish, right, people who are pregnant. And then also the other piece that's really important is like, if I decide to have a baby and I am at a certain station as a professional, when I come back, that gap in my resume and that timeline gap is one that I do not recover from. I am punished and penalized for leaving the workforce at a particular stage because I had a child. So what people don't think about also is that care work that happens in the home, and work of the home or work of women and femmes in the home is always undervalued. And this is something that we see even like in marriage, right? Like nobody thinks about like the free labor that is done by a wife, right? That if you paid a housekeeper, they would be making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right? Yeah. Because the work that is done, the cooking, the cleaning, the taking care of children, the organizing, taking care of the home, like finances, all the stuff that largely falls on women to do. And then they go to work. And then they pay somebody to take care of their kids. So that work that's happening is undervalued and it's free, right? It's happening within the context of a marriage. Or if you're in a single family, like it's a singular individual doing all that work to stand up their household. So we don't pay people for that work, right? So then when it comes to, someone being pregnant, leaving the workforce and coming back, then how are they meant to continue, right? And also it discourages people from having families. I think the other thing about this that's important is that, paid leave should not fall on individuals or the companies, right? Mm-hmm. Like it should be on a federal level. Everyone's taken care of. That's just part of how we pay our taxes, right? We should all want to pour into that, right?
And is it as well as the penalties you're talking about? I read that in terms of paid leave, I mean, there's also negative outcomes for the baby, right? I think I read that Black women are much less likely to take paid leave, and women who take less paid leave have worse health outcomes for the baby. And I know we haven't talked much about the baby, but this disparity we're seeing for women, Black women 3 times more likely to die during childbirth, I think that ripples onto babies as well, right?
Absolutely. Babies need to be with their mothers. Babies expect, I call it like, there's that 10 months of intrauterine gestation and then 10 months of extrauterine gestation. A baby cannot walk before 10 months, right? So they need to be held and they expect to be held. And so they expect to be with a buffering adult, whether that's their mother or another adult that they develop secure attachment with, right? Yeah. That is critical for baby survival and for their emotional intelligence and development. And so So yes, so if you don't have that time with your baby, if you have to go back to work, and what happens in the United States is that 1 in 4 women go back to work 10 days after having a baby.
That's insane.
10 days.
I mean, that is insane. Yeah.
Exactly.
And on the baby health, I mean, I think obviously breastfeeding a topic which is close to Elvie's heart, given that we want to support women who make that choice, but obviously not making judgment around that. But I think there's also quite shocking statistics around Black women, right? In the sense that 1/4 of Black women have never breastfed versus, say, 10% of white women. And I think I've heard you talk a bit about that there's actually discrimination again happening in the hospitals and a push towards formula milk. I mean, what's your sense of what's happening there?
Yes. So, I'm proud to say that my son's 20 years old. He's in college. I nursed him for 3 years. It was the honor of my life. It was super bonding and connective. He never took a bottle. He was just always on demand nursing. And I would have probably gone longer. I think I felt some pressure around when he was 3 from a friend. But before that, I hadn't. I just, and he was going to school and I was like, oh, how's this going to work? Historically, again, just to frame up, right, for people. So what was happening during enslavement, in addition to Black women caring for, women in the household, doing domestic duties, there were also wet nurses. Wet nurses were individuals who were essentially bond women who had babies of their own. And so they had milk supply. And what they were essentially forced to do was to use the greater supply of their milk to feed the babies of the mistress, and to use that milk not for their own baby. Oftentimes their children would get very little milk at all, and sometimes would die from malnourishment. That milk, what's been called black milk, right? There was an actual market, which was a secondary market within slavery, where bond women were loaned out based on their milk supply, and people would say, like, get paid to loan out this woman to, feed your baby, and then I want her back. And so there was this whole market developed, a submarket developed, that was part of the slave markets, where these women would be traded for their bodies to produce milk. And so we have that. So then you have people who, when we move from slavery, who are still wet nursing as free women, right? And I think that what's important to think about is, like, a lot of us, including myself, up until recently, could reach back and touch an ancestor who had this reality, right? So if you think about it from that standpoint, we're talking about like an intergenerational traumatic lived experience that is alive and that is palpable. And so we talk about a complex and yet challenging but empowering moment that we can be in around reclaiming our bodies, around reclaiming food, this first food, which is human milk for our babies, and yet also the fraught relationship we have historically with our bodies not being our own. And so you have that we have to hold in one hand. Then you have, right, the undermining that happens within our communities by formula companies who move into and infiltrate communities, Black and brown communities, and make people feel as though they cannot nurse, or that breastfeeding is gauche, or, it's dirty, or your baby can't get enough milk, or whatever the ways they use. It's pervasive marketing that occurs. So we have to think about, like, the impact, right, on our community, on Black people specifically, over time, and what this means. Like, it's like revolutionary to breastfeed, right? I should be able to have my child, feed my child food that comes from my body, right, and raise them in an environment that's safe, right? And so what has happened in August every year, Black Breastfeeding Week was established by 3 Black women who essentially said, hey, there are unique challenges, and also there are amazing things that are happening in our communities around breastfeeding that we want to acknowledge and advance and lift up, but also we want to think about how we can do things differently, how we can be empowered. And yes, like we need to make it so that people feel like they can succeed. And I had a model because my mother breastfed me. And so when she came to visit, she was like helping me latch and teaching me. And I had a commitment because I wanted to do it, but I also had a model, right? I saw my sister be breastfed. I knew that my mother breastfed me. She was so proud. She said, I nursed you till you were 2 years. The first year you were 32 pounds off of just milk. And so she's so proud, right? If I had to ever stop and pump my breast with like these cords, I would never have done it. And I did have a pump and it was impossible to figure out how to use. And there were so many things and I just never used it. I used a manual to kind of express like if I had discomfort, but other than that, I did not pump. And when the pump came from Elvie, I had this exhale and a sigh that was like of sadness, Tania. And you know why? It's because I thought about so many times that I could have used that and it didn't exist for me yet. You were dreaming on this possibility. And, you came when you came and I'm grateful you're here. And so I thought about like, wow, people that are in my care have this solution that's hands-free, that is discreet, that like I can think about so many times where I was in instances where I did need a pump and I was so uncomfortable. Like what's important is also solutions. Like we can't just say, well, you should breastfeed, well, you should chest feed, you should do this. It's like, well, we can say that people should do that, but how have we structured it so we make it easy for them? And so when you think about that, we do have to design solutions. So I'm grateful that there are solutions that exist that I can point people to, but we certainly have not on a societal level and a structural level made it easy.
Yeah, I know. And it's everything you're saying chimes so closely with how I look at women's issues in general, right? Which go beyond birthing experiences, which go beyond breastfeeding, which is what you're saying, which if you want change, you've got to give women the models, the education, and then the actual tools. At Elvie now, we've been focusing on the technology. My background was more on the education side. But on the models, isn't that also what Mama Glow is doing? Like by sharing positive birthing stories, by sharing those positive stories, you can sort of start breaking that cycle that you've described so eloquently.
Yeah. I think that this is part of what we do, but, I think like when we think about systems and breaking, basically being disruptive, I think it's so interesting, the term disrupt. And I was thinking about it and I was like, I don't love disrupt because I don't think we're disrupting. I don't think you're disrupting. I think we're actually looking to see what's actually disturbed, right? What's not working. And then we're coming in and we're bringing actual harmony. We're bringing back in, symbiosis. We're bringing in connection.
I couldn't agree more. I think what I'm most proud about what we've done with Elvie is I've shown how technology, to your point, can help women. It's about feeling in control of your body, making your own decisions around your health, about your body, about your family. And I was going to segue into one of the final questions, which is what are you most feeling positive about? But it sounds like it is around this change that's happening in the community, the grassroots approach. And I think I've also heard you mention about accountability, that there is a sense of increased awareness, and is that leading in a positive way to better accountability? And also just to mention before we jump into that, I think you're being far too modest by saying you might have just helped one person. I know you've helped tens, if not hundreds of thousands of women already.
Well, I, first of all, appreciate that. And I know that's the same for you. I would say one thing you did ask me about that I didn't fully answer was about the Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act, right? Yeah. I think that is something where, it was introduced 3 times. This is the 3rd time. We're at a critical mass here and it needs to get passed. And so what it is a comprehensive package of legislation. There's 13 pieces of legislation inside of this larger package that is being presented to try to pass through at once. Once it goes through, what will happen is there will be federal funding to actually then implement on a state and local level the provisions inside of the bills. And some of them include, obviously, education around anti-bias training, access to doula support, resources for community care workers, like all kinds of things, right? There are ways to use social media, to use your platform. There's ways that you can donate to local organizations and support their work as well. My biggest thing is always thinking about like how you can support doula training, like make a donation to pour into the education for scholarship support for doulas. There's many people who are outside because they cannot afford to come in because of scholarship, because of financial reasons. And so we do have a scholarship at Mama Glow where we support people on a need basis. People need to get access to doulas. So privately held companies and publicly held companies, but companies in the private sector can make a commitment to like work with community-based organizations who are deploying the services, like what happened with us, right? So I think that there's innovative ways that people are solving and working towards solution that don't always incorporate or hinge on, policy and legislation, but are certainly informed by it. And so I just wanted to offer up that and say that, there is a lot that we can do to get informed and educated. And yeah, we need to pass the Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act. It would be tremendous. There's so much that we can benefit from.
So thank you, Latham. And so it sounds like, because I was thinking that too, right? People in the audience who are listening and also, shocked as they're understanding more about this issue, which is quite invisible to large swathes of society. There's a lot they can do to support on the community side through Mama Glow. On the legislation side, you mentioned that people could contact their local representative. How can they get guidance on what to say and how to go about that?
Yeah, there's actually a website. I think it's like Pass the Momnibus Now, where you can go there and there's like a template that you can fill out, and based on like where you're located, you can have it sent out. So it's very easy to do. You could also go to the Black Maternal Health Caucus website, and you can go there and do the same types of inputs and send a letter. So that's the easiest way, I think. On the Mama Glow Foundation website, there's a resource. It's a Black Maternal Health resource guide. And we also have a birthing while Black resource guide. It's like a birthing while Black, I think it's called Toolkit. But what it is like a 60-page mobile resource. So you can just download it to your phone and read it. It's awesome. And it's got information on like, what is a doula? What is a midwife? What are the differences? What questions to ask a doula if you're hiring them? There's reflections, there's resources and stuff. It's a really great guide for people who are trying to figure out like just how to navigate, this space, and who want an empowering tool to help them do that. So I love this tool that we've created, but I think it's important to know, essentially, again, going back, like how to contact your representatives, and then what you can be doing on an individual level to advance things, right? So it is individual. We're collectively all working together, but you can do something as an individual, like each one of us can.
Thank you, Latham. I think that's a really important and positive way to end the podcast. But before we sign off, I did want to just also mention that obviously the name of the podcast is Skin Like a Rhino. And we call it that because I've been very privileged to meet a lot of really incredible women. And I think for any woman to succeed and have big impact in society, you have to at times develop quite a skin like a rhino in order to be able to filter out the noise and the naysayers. But when it comes to incredible women, I can't think of anyone who I'm assuming here must have in so many ways, like to relentlessly and so tirelessly work on an issue that people don't really want to think about or know about. In your, when you look at your own personal resilience and strength, how have you had to develop Skin Like a Rhino?
That's such a good question. I had to develop that thick skin to navigate a space where we should be seen and accepted and centered and prioritized, and we're not. And so I've had to come to the realization that Black women are part of the unprotected class. And so the fight is even bigger to get people to see our humanity, our dignity, our safety is important, that our lives are important. And so that's one thing I've had to develop thick skin around. I definitely would say also that because people say they care about women and moms and children, but people don't, there's a fantasy that is put forth that we care about families, but we actually see the opposite in how our society is structured and how also our laws and policy are set up around how families are protected in this country. And so I've had to, I think, develop a thick skin around how we accommodate the needs of people who are falling through the cracks of our system. Because what we encounter, what we see, what we're exposed to as care workers and doulas is really challenging. And so part of what we have to do is pour into ourselves and practice self-care so that we don't essentially fall apart, right, or burn out. And I'm now in a stage in my life, Tania. I'm now in a stage in my life where I'm focused on softening. And I've always been about like being soft and easefulness and all that. But especially now, as I'm in my 40s, as I continue to like navigate my life as an individual, but also with supports in place, it took a long time to get to where I have the team around me that feels sustainable and supportive and things are good and smooth, right?
I think you're right. Like at the beginning, when you're working on an issue, like the kind of issues you and I are working on, you've got to be angry. It's your calling. There's got to be so much sort of just blindly racing ahead, skin like a rhino. And I completely agree on the softening. But it's also, I think the softening is important so that we can then refocus on the bits where we can have the most impact. For me, I stepped aside from being CEO a few months ago because suddenly running a team of 200 people wasn't really playing to my strengths, and it was draining my energy and so on. But Latham, I'm conscious I've taken up so much of your time today, but it's just been such an enthralling conversation, and I've really enjoyed this time with you. I personally have learned so much, and as I said, I just respect so much for what you're doing. Congratulations on softening up, but I can see you always still have so much passion and drive in you. And I'm so happy and proud that we at Elvie are also partnering with you at Mama Glow. Thank you so much, Latham.
Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be in partnership with you as well, and a dream come true. Thank you.